Hi, everyone, and welcome to Everything Life Coaching. I am Noelle. I'm one of the founders of Lumia Coaching, host of your podcast. And with me today, I have not only an old and dear friend, but one of the original architects of the Lumia curriculum who sat alongside me as we developed some of the key components of our program. Lena Queen, it is a pleasure to have you on the Everything Life Coaching podcast once again.
Thank you. I so appreciate it. And so glad to be here. That's a beautiful opening. Thank you.
It is a beautiful opening, and beyond being a curriculum architect, just so folks know, you go by Queen. So
Yes.
I will be referring to you as Queen. You are an erotic intelligence coach, a licensed clinical social worker, a somatic sexologist, a decolonial sexuality educator, therapist, healer, and author whose work centers on integrating mind body energy, somatic, erotic, and spiritual frameworks. Did I get all
Mhm.
that right?
You got all that right. Yes.
Also, I have here all of your most recent publications. And so I
Thank
just wanted
you.
to show our listeners that, this stuff is real.
It's very real.
It is very real. It is very published, and it's really important work. So not
Thank
only is it
you.
an honor to have had your hands and mind touch our program, but it's an honor to be talking about what you've been putting out into the world recently to showcase the splendor of coaching in this space. So thank you for all you do.
Yes. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, I wanted to explain to folks why this is an important topic for coaches, and there are so
Yes.
many aspects of coaching, and it's such a broad arena. What we do at Lumia is cognitive and linguistic in nature, empirically based, but cognitive and linguistic. What does that mean? It means that we deal with the brain, the way that we think, we deal with behavior, we deal with language, but what we don't deal with within the framework of the International Coaching Federation standards is the soma, is the body, because that is a whole other world of study and practice, one that you delve into very, very deeply. And so
Hmm.
today I wanted to raise an example of how these two worlds can really blend together and give
Absolutely.
and a lens into the world of somatic work, because we get that question often, is do you do somatic coach training? And the answer is no, and you should study with a practitioner who does, like Queen. So and so let's kick it off and
Yes.
and get into it. So thinking about your most recent publication, which is Shift, and a beautiful book, a self-liberation healing practice, and thinking about all of the different influences that you pull in, integrative psychotherapy, somatic healing, decolonizing wellness, and neuro-spirituality, and erotic intelligence. Now, these are
Mhm.
all terms and words that most folks, and even me, even with the broad background that I have, aren't entirely familiar with at face value. So can we just explain what you're up to?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I so appreciate this. This conversation publicly is also full circle because I remember doing this, having this conversation in Widener's human sexuality program where they were
Yeah.
like, Queen, this is beautiful. How are you going to do it? Now you understand how I did it, right? How it's done with healing the erotic self. And so it was looking at all the components you were talking about. First, with integrative psychotherapy. Why integrative? Because we are whole. I've always come from a wholeness approach. And so being taught with CBT, it always felt very lacking, right?
Yeah.
It didn't see all of me. And as a Black person of African American descent, it totally was colorblind. And
Mhm.
in a society that has a racial caste system, it was only causing more harm to folks like myself and of the global majority. So integrative psychotherapy was like, no, there's a wholeness approach that can honor mind, body, spirit, and energy, and also be culturally aware. And so that's where,
Hey.
right? So that's integrative psychotherapy. When it comes to somatic healing, it is, well, yes, how does the body heal? I'm a trauma therapist. My background is trauma therapy, inpatient hospitalization, helping folks manage and heal from suicidality and be in relationship if they're too. And so the thing was, how does the body heal?
Mhm.
I had a personal healing background in comedic yoga and meditation that really looked at, okay, here is how the body heals.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to look at, and as I got older and did this work, I wanted to look at neuroplasticity. I had to geek out on it, right? Because for everyday folks, for my clients, it was like, Queen, why am I doing this?
Mhm.
How does this help me? If a person feels anxious and they've been taught and socialized that their anxiousness will be less if they do something outside of themselves, not understanding what's happening within, it disempowers people. And so
Mhm.
somatic healing empowers people by really understanding what is in your locus of control through the lens of neuroplasticity and neuroscience. And then decolonial wellness, again, we have a racial caste system, and I think it does a lot of harm when we start in a place that forgets how we got there, right?
Mhm.
And so being decolonial really is being able to decenter colonial understanding of our mind, body, spirit, and energy, of our lived experience, to say the isms exist: racism, ableism, all the things in which inherent bias has become so prolific, i.e., our current social environment, I mean, political, social environment, we can't ignore it. And so decolonizing challenges the defaults that we are socialized in. Because as a dark skinned person of African American descent, I was taught that I was inherently undesirable. And therefore, I had to do other things outside of myself to become desirable, which is harmful. And
Yeah.
so challenging the defaults by decolonizing wellness. And my wellness will not, as a melanated person, will not look like wellness for a person who's not melanated. It
Yes.
invites very radically honest conversations and creates a sense of safety for folks who are often not seen.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Now, how about erospirituality and erotic intelligence?
So, erospirituality is a concept that I expanded on, a concept that comes from a two spirit, queer person, indigenous person. I want to say from New Zealand or Canada. I think New Zealand. New Zealand by way of education in Canada. And so for me, this looked at the relationship to nature
Mhm.
and how soma in nature was something that was real an indigenous healing art and the disconnection from that. And so for me, it was about expanding that relationship between soma and nature to decolonize somatics that says that the body is not without the mind, right?
Mhm.
One of my mentors, Amina Peterson, was like, well, the body includes the mind. So when we're talking about colonized somatics and what we know somatics to be, it still puts us in parts instead of wholeness. Eros spirituality is a sacred reclamation of spirituality, mind and body, intuitive mind and body, and our spirituality. Informed by the erotic being the energy of desirability that's sexual, spiritual, and non sexual. And so, Eros spirituality was like, I was like, how do we decolonize sacred sexuality?
Mm.
Right? We have commodified and colonized the indigenous healing arts of the global majority, and we have ignored our own ancestral work. And so, Eros spirituality invites us in to follow our own lineage of healing work. And through erotic intelligence, the 5 areas of erotic intelligence identified by Dr. Alexis K really shows us the 5 parts in which we show up, the wholeness parts in which we show up, that we're like, oh, this is how I can engage. And the Virgo in me is like, I need a framework. I need a roadmap. And
Yes.
so, right, like, so erotic intelligence becomes the roadmap to engage in eros spirituality.
Yes. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for all of this. So let me just mirror back to make sure that I have, understanding, and also to kind of position this as like, who is this for, right? So,
Yes.
what I'm hearing from you is that this is for folks of color to really take a step into beginning to understand how to experience a sense of wholeness for themselves. And this is also for coaches who are already trained in coaching arts, but want to deepen their ethical and their inclusive practice in being able to provide true functional resources for folks who may be different from them when they reach the limitations of their knowledge, but can sense that someone is experiencing pain in an arena
Mm.
that they cannot access due to
Mm.
the limitations of their own lens, their own colonization, their own intersectional landscape. Do I have that right? Did I miss anything?
I would expand to say this is for folks who are also non-melanated. This is for white folks too, right? It centers the global majority, people who are melanated, but this is for folks who what I call sexuality and queer affirming folks,
Mhm.
right? Of multiracial backgrounds are invited into this work, just understanding that they're not centered into this work.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way the literal place that I was introduced to how powerful your concepts are is at my dining room table.
Yes,
Over,
yes.
yeah,
I always say
over.
one of the reasons why we're so close is because you have always been a person who could have these conversations with me and do your own interrogation, recognize like where you have privilege and what does make space safe for me. And that has been part of the intimacy of our relationship, right? That has been created because we've been able to have these really hard conversations about the racial lens that informs desirability politics.
Yeah, it's huge. It's real, and we need. I sit oftentimes with the shared container of our relationship, and I'm like, I wish more people could have these conversations with this degree of honesty and lack of defensiveness.
Yes, yes, yes. And how healing that is for all involved, absolutely positively. And so what I realize is that folks who are drawn to my work are folks who are ready to manage the discomfort, right? It's that edge of erotic expansion, one of the six erotic needs, that is like I'm willing to do the work, and this work is healing work. It's ancestral remembrance, and it's healing work, and I find it to be completely powerful.
It is, and even thinking about the way that I use the tenets for myself in my own discovery, um, I'm a pretty tough customer for coaches, for therapists, because of my depth of knowledge. But I remember when we began talking about healing the erotic self, and I cried at the dining room table with the recognition of how I had been harming myself in terms of putting out attraction into the world, really for a capital frame. And I was like, oh shit, and that cracked me open. And so these are frameworks that are universally accessible.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, positively. It's always that place again, wholeness that is going to build off of the work that you're already doing, right? And so there's this whole thing in spirituality community where we always talk about like no spiritual bypassing, and like
Yeah,
this is the work that really invites the relationship to spirit, and yes, you see the harm that you've done to yourself in a very compassionate way because you were very gentle with yourself to be like once you had that light like oh shit it was just like oh shit.
yeah, right. And then we move on, and then we move on from there, and then we move on from there. So thinking about the body and thinking about how we store things in the body. I took a training with the International Coaching Federation several months ago, and the woman who led the training was an ICF coach, and she was also a Reiki teacher, and she was also a mechanical engineer. So it was like this whole smorgasbord of what she was up to. Are you getting feedback? Can you hear feedback from me? Great. All right, cool. I can hear a little bit of feedback, but we'll keep rolling. Um, so when I took this class on coaching and somatics, one of the first things that I realized was that there's so much to somatics, and that it really is its whole own body of work that goes hand in hand with ICF core competencies and standards, and especially looking at the way that the ICF is now saying we need cultural humility as coaches. We need cultural humility. We need to be in touch with our own interior as coaches. We need to be in touch with our own biases as coaches, in touch with the experience of others as coaches. And the body keeps score. The body holds it all. And so this is a space that I'd like to unpack for understanding and education.
Yes, absolutely. It's one of the things we talked about in Shift when I taught in the practice, why we put it in the curriculum, right? Is to be able to have people understand that you can have your perfect client, but you have no control over who your client loves.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
More,
Right? Like
more.
you can be in this place where you know from your personal lived experience and from your desire that you want to hold space, but your biases will show up when your client challenges your bias by their mere existence.
Yes. Yes.
And so to be able to manage the discomfort and that allows your client to fully show up and take space really is what Shift is. An embodiment practice. Everybody thinks it's an acronym. It's not an acronym. It is how you move from wounded to empowered, right? And what I use is the energy centers as a healing map to that empowerment. And so
Yeah.
for coaches, it is you cannot take your clients to a place that you have not gone to, and you can't bring them back ethically. And so, ethically, being able to introduce somatic work in a place that is tangible, because, like you said, it is so much in depth, right? And so, what I wanted to do was make this accessible to coaches, make it accessible to those who are out in their own healing to say, like, what can I do now to make my work somatic work? Because what we see online is a very commodified way of somatic work, right? That it's about activities that you have the body through instead of the immersion in which you put yourself through. And so
Yeah.
some, Shift reminds you of the immersive experience, the integrative experience of self, and not just the body work of somatics.
Yes. So let's back up. So, the key aspects of our curriculum that you sat and helped me author are thinking about our intersectionality, our unconscious bias, how the coaches relate to themselves, to their clients. When we're talking about shift, we're talking about the framework that's in your book, which has 4 components of ground, center, nurture, and affirm. I went into each of these, but very broadly, can you explain how a coach, an individual, a client, a person, a trainer can use this framework to identify needs and deficits and make decisions moving forward? Like, how does our body know?
Right. One, I'm going to introduce y'all to what I call a presence practice. Because a presence practice is when we are in the moment, not worried about the past nor the future, but our body is responding. And so when I think of a presence practice, it's one of the components of erotic intelligence. I think of awareness with intention and effort. And so grounding is the first part of that effort, which is about we're talking decision making. Grounding is just that, staying present in the moment. You're activating your presence practice, right? There is no, I need to figure it out. It is something happens and I'm sensory responding to it,
Mm,
right? And I'm going to be mindful of how I'm responding to it, because when we are in a place of activation in crisis, we are normally not mindful. So it helps us, grounding helps us go from awareness to mindfulness,
mhm.
right? By activating our presence practice. And then we move into center, because listen, as femme folk, we've been socialized that our erotic labor, our somatic labor, our emotional labor is for other people and not ourselves.
Yes.
And I lovingly am like, fuck that. We're not doing that. We are reclaiming our erotic power to ourselves, and center asks very gentle, clarifying questions, right? What do I need to do to take care of myself? Who is this moment for? Right? And so it puts us in this place of now we can center ourselves, how to, selfishness is really self preservation.
Mm.
And so it helps us activate self preservation. That's what centering is about.
I love that reframe. What we could, and I think a lot of folks experience shame when they feel like they have a need that's met, or they're exhausted, or they're wrung out, and they need time for themselves. And the first instinct is I shouldn't feel this way. I should continue.
When I was developing shift, one of my colleagues was like, Queen, I'm a mother of three kids. When I get home, I'm not having a moment for myself. And I was like, well, let's create one. And so
Yeah.
centering became that practice of being able to make a choice for yourself with and manage the shame that you're feeling,
Yeah.
right? Until it can dissolve. Because what I also recognize in decolonial somatic work is that it's okay to be not okay.
Yes.
Where commodified, colonized somatic work is always about getting to be okay. And it's like, no, take care of yourself, baby, because your heart is broke. Take care of yourself because you're exhausted. Let's take care of ourselves in the present.
I want to stay with this concept for a little bit because I think that this is becoming an increasingly important concept in our world. Um, Danielle, who you know, and I just did a podcast on burnout, and one of the things that I did in preparation for that podcast was traced different states throughout history that have been burnout adjacent, like World War II, Jim Crow era, what folks experienced in situations where they didn't have the privilege of taking a break from their job because they were burnt out. When it's and in our time, I think that one of the great unmasking the privilege is that everyone is beginning to experience what it feels like with constant stress, constant strain, constant trauma. You don't have control over it, and there's no way out.
Yes, exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And so I always say this, you know, what what can you do when we are in a system that requires our perpetual exhaustion? Because
Ooh,
from an ancestral understanding, right, and we recognize that epigenetics is a thing, that trauma and trauma responses can be passed through generations. The one thing I understand from my lineage is that there is a way to be in relationship with my energy that allows me to self-preserve, because otherwise I even wouldn't be alive if my ancestors did not find some way to preserve themselves,
yeah.
right? And so being able to recognize that burnout and perpetual exhaustion is really the energy that capitalism requires of us. Centering says, oh, so what would happen if you didn't self-neglect?
Yeah.
What would happen if you didn't self-sabotage? Because now you feel like you have to earn rest, right? We're socialized to earn rest. We're socialized to earn pleasure. We're socialized to earn a break versus just taking one.
Yes, yes. So many of my colleagues have been talking about the concept of slow productivity, which is also a book that came out not too long ago. So I think this is kind of like fitting in with what we're experiencing, and also acknowledging that as a society, we never recovered from the collective trauma of the pandemic. One day it was like, oh, hey, this is over.
Right. Why? Because capitalism wasn't going to exist. Right. It requires our labor. And it was like, what do you mean y'all are working from not working? what do you mean you're working from home, right? Which is also about us going, I can go down a rabbit hole, but also about us going back into work, right? There was a place where, as a licensed clinical social worker, I did not have to have a brick and mortar in order to have a contract with insurance. Now I'm required because I need to see clients at least once a month in an office. And so, but I don't expect lay folks to recognize, right, the intricacies of like how capitalism works and requires our exhaustion. But I can teach you, when do you take a break? I can teach you how to rest, because even learning how to rest is so important for coaches and their clients and our clients.
Yeah. And this is, you know, the ICF updated their core competencies in November 2025. And a big part of that update was asking coaches to develop a reflective practice and to develop a rest practice and to form a relationship with supervision or to manage emotions. And so, what I love about your framework, walking us through grounding and then anchoring, um, is beginning to get in touch with what our limits feel like.
Right. Yes. I again, when I think about centering, what it's going to do, when I think about emotional intelligence, it's going to activate self compassion, because that becomes the key to self permission.
Mhm.
Right. And then when we move to nurture,
Yes.
nurture is when I wanted to introduce the wholeness approach. So now we're out of our heads and we've moved into our bodies, but most people get stuck with like, Queen One, I don't know how to rest, and I don't know what to do if I want to rest. Right.
Mhm.
And so now when I'm asking the prompting question, well, how are you taking care of yourself? I get the physical hygiene. Well, I do these things, right? And I'm like, but exhaustion is about spirit work. Exhaustion is
Okay.
just not energy. Exhaustion is spirit work. When we decolonize our understanding of somatics, we're introducing, you don't have to believe in a higher power, but our energy exists because our nervous system creates electrical impulses.
Yes.
Our awareness of those electrical impulses literally is spirit. Now we're our consciousness, right, that is developing answers and logic and understanding, and now our decision making process is in nurture, and we're allowing intuition, which is actually a in neuroscience is called neuroception. So our intuition is actually a function of our nervous system. When I read that, I was like, I knew it. Ancestors knew it. We knew it. We think intuition is just chance.
No. So it's embodied.
It's embodied. It is literally it's polyvagal theory, neuroception, right? And so it is one of the functions of our nervous system is to receive and process information subconsciously, that when consciously connects to it, it becomes that something says. It becomes our inner voice.
All right. This is setting off light bulbs for me. So I want to share like two instances that I've talked about. Two real people in my life. One person is a good friend who's like going through every imaginable patch of hell right now and keeps saying to me, like, doing all the right things. I'm getting right, I'm exercising, I'm eating right. This is with that activity set of how somatic gets, brushed off on busy when it's actually a polyvagal function.
Right? Yes. And so they're choosing their choices. Well, what works if they slow down to be like, well, what works for you? Because
Mm,
frequency wise, right, using energy and energy medicine, frequency wise, we need to have the right frequency to match the frequency we are experiencing. And
yeah.
so if you're choosing breath work, but that is not what your anxiety needs sound, it's going to be different frequencies. So your choice in the practices are going to be different. And so what nurture says is like, just list two activities per sense that you like to do. We're activating desire that you like to do, that when you feel anxious, when you feel unsure, when you feel self-doubt, you can practice these things for 15 minutes, because neuroscience says we need 15 minutes to activate change to start to de-escalate.
Mm. That's really important. And okay, so here's another point I think we need to touch on. And both you and I have experienced this is people, coaches, educators, authors, speakers who have a sexuality background. When we use the term erotic, it conjures a commercial idea of sex. But what we're really talking about is sensory activation and self knowing.
Absolutely. And that self knowing, the erotic is the energy of desirability sexually, non sexually, and spiritually.
Okay. So then these baseline practices have nothing to do with engaging in sexual acts. They're all about the relationship with the self in terms of getting your body and your spirit and your mind into a place where you can put out desirability in a way where you're attracting what you would like.
Absolutely. In therapy, they use transpersonal, right? When they're inviting in energy work and breath work, right? They're inviting in some what we consider somatic practices, but forgetting that these practices are about the relationship to spirit and spirit outside of religiosity. It is about, again, this, think of, like you said, spirit as self.
Yeah, spirit as self. And I think from a coaching perspective, a lot of times where I saw coaching get twisted around a whole lot was when the book The Secret came out and talked about this idea of manifesting. That if you just like, think about manifest what you want, it will attract it to you. That's not the way it works.
Right, right. It's the same thing about manifestation. I'm like, that's not the way it works.
That's not the way it works. But when we're talking about desirability, I mean, it it comes down to such basic fundamental aspects of how we want to be understood.
It absolutely does. And we still live in a society that's been also hijacked by our social media timelines that dehumanizes us.
Yeah.
Right. And then for those of us who have been connected and very tender with our that side of us, we're like, I refuse. There's no way. Like we feel gaslit. We feel like
Yes.
there's no way that this is not a thing. What is everybody else doing? And so yes, it is one of those things where we have to be mindful. Like the nurture part allows us expansion. It allows us to see wholeness, mind, body, spirit, and energy. And now we can have connection and meaning and belonging. Right. And so, and that's what, and the reason why I use nurture, because self-care, it's like 2010 when I started to introduce this into my professional work. And I just remember thinking, if I say self-care, people are going to be like, Queen, what you selling? And I'm going to be like, nothing. And I literally, again, I was like, the source, I need a word, right? And the word I found was nurture, because that was the word. When people hear nurture, they hear it. They hear a softness. They hear a tenderness. They hear an intentionality that is not just, like, as you said, busyness.
I have been geeking out on language and coaching recently in exactly this way, the way that different words evoke experience for the listener. Yeah. And so coaches, we've all been so indoctrinated into the language of self-care. It just like rattles off the tongue. And thinking about how that might land for a client or how somebody might glaze over without a deeper, more informed meaning of that kind of practice.
Yes, we want to empower. So even when I think about the word empower, it means embodied power.
Yeah.
Right. And so for me, it was nurture as a way as of a person myself. I developed this because